Hi, I'm Molly with Three Rivers March Hare, and this is Zelda, who's hanging out on my lap, just in case she pokes her head up so you don't think anything strange is going on. And today we're going to work on making a gnome. So here on the table I have all of the pieces that we're going to need, and I'll go through and describe all of them for you. Glass beads and a wooden nose for your gnome, and some stuffing. And of course, the most important part is the beard and eyebrows for your gnome. For the body, you're going to need to do a tube of 120 rows, and then your shirt, which is 16 rows, and then hang your hem, and then knit an additional 35 rows. For the hat, you will knit 16 rows, hang your hem, and then knit an additional 60 rows. And I usually knit these three as one long snake. And then when you separate them, what you want to do is go through and pick up your stitches with whatever color yarn you're doing. I'm using a contrasting color so that everyone can see what I'm doing, but usually this would be the same color. I would normally use a natural or neutral color for the body. You're really not going to see anything other than the bottom. So really it could be anything. That's just my preference. So for the hat and the shirt, you can do matching. You can do colors that don't match. It's really up to you and what you would like. And so with that, I am just using these, like I said, so that you're able to see the stitches and what I'm doing easily. All right, and I should mention that when you are picking up the stitches, I like to use doubled up yarn to do that, just so that it has some extra strength when we're pulling on it. I should also mention that when you're picking your stitches up, I like to use a doubled up strand of yarn so that it's a little bit stronger, because we are going to be putting tension on that. So the body, the 120 stitch tube, we're going to be doubling this up. So I will take this end and bring it inside, reach through the other end, and pull it out like this. Then what I'm doing is finding my ends, and I am going to gather these, making sure that it's neat and that those stitches aren't puckered up too much. I'll tie this as tightly as I can, which is why I like using that doubled up yarn, like I said. Tight. And a second. Then I will take the outside and do the same. So gathering this, making sure the edges go to the inside, pulling those ends into the middle. So I'm gathering these and tying a knot to tighten the outside set. So I've tried a double knot, and then what I'm going to do is take both sets and tie them together. And I always prefer to do a double knot, like so.
Does it matter what knot they do?
It doesn't. Just make sure that it's tight. All right, so your piece should look like this, and I am now going to cut those ends off and fold this so that those loose ends are to the inside. Now what I'm going to do is take doubled up yarn, again the same color as my body is, and I'm going to start and pick up stitches. So I'm picking up this set of stitches, leaving these two, picking up two, skip two, picking up two. So like this, and it doesn't have to be exact. You just have to gather around the edge. So I do have one that I've already done this for, so I'll set this one aside. And this is what it should look like when it's done. So all my stitches, half of my stitches around the top have been gathered, but it's been gathered all the way around, and I have my ends hanging off here. The next step is the glass beads. I use the glass beads so that the gnome has some weight to it and doesn't tip over easily. Other people have used beans or other items. It's whichever you prefer. So I have my glass beads inside, and I kind of let them settle.
Now, what is that doing, that action of shaking it?
It just helps them settle in there a little bit better, and also gives it a little more shape in the bottom. Now I will take my fiber fill and start stuffing.
How much should a person stuff it?
It's to whatever you want. I like them to be solid, but not too firm. I'm going to just pull that a little bit. So, about like this. Now I'm going to tuck my stuffing in and tie a knot here so that I can gather this. This gather doesn't have to be perfect because it will be inside of the hat for the gnome, but you do want it solid so that it doesn't open up.
And when should I tie the knots and then pull?
When you have stuffed it enough. And with that, with doing the knots, you just want to make sure that you're pulling this tight and it's gathered, and then tying those knots tightly.
And do I fully want the hole closed, or is it okay to have a little one?
It's okay to have this little gap. Like I said, it's going to be inside the hat, so something like this isn't as important. I have those knotted. I'm just going to take this into my needle and bring it out through the side. Then I will pull this back a little bit and pull this out. Trim, and that end is gone. So now we have our body done. We're going to take our shirt and pull it up onto the gnome. Glass beads down, putting our shirt on. And some people have commented that they feel that they don't need to put a shirt on, and you don't have to. This is whatever you want to do. I just like it because I like the way the hung hem looks on the bottom. So I'm setting my gnome and just making sure the shirt comes down to the table. Like so. And now all I'm going to do is where I have this stitching along the top where I've gathered, I'm just going to make sure it's nice and rolled up like this.
Now, what does pulling on this do?
This gathers it.
So you are removing the orange?
I'm not removing it. I'm just tying another knot like this. Tighten this along the top, and I'm tying a knot here like so. Okay. When I'm putting the hat on, I will be stitching through this layer and into the body, so that will secure the top edge. If I'm going to be selling gnomes, and depending on who I'm giving to, I will sometimes stitch around the bottom also to keep the shirt down, because kids love to pick up the shirt and see if there's anything underneath. Then once again, just taking these,
Does it matter how long I cut it?
long enough to thread and take it through and bury the ends.
So it does, all you're doing is pulling that through to cut?
Yes, and to bury it so that the end isn't visible. There. All right, so now we have our gnome with our shirt on. So it's time for the nose. I usually do the nose yarn in the same color of the body, but like I said, I'm using a contrasting color so that you can see what I'm doing. Now, double my yarn up. Through my needle. My nose placement, I figure about halfway up the gnome and then just a hair higher. All right, and so I've figured out where my nose is going to be placed. I'm going to hold my thumb here, and coming from the back, I'm going to angle down. So I'm starting up a little bit higher than where my nose is and coming out where my thumb is. Then pull like this. Then I'm going to put my nose on my yarn. And I'm going to go back through, and see, I'm not leaving very much room here in between. So I'm going back through and coming out close to where I went in.
And that one you're just going straight on, or are you angling it as well?
There's a little bit of an angle there also. So now we have our nose there.
Make sure the holes are on the side and not in the middle.
Yes. And so tie the back into a knot, and we're going to pull it tight so it actually indents into our shirt. So I've tied that. Now I'm going to do a second knot to secure it. We'll then bury my ends.
Do you have to angle the needle for this?
You just want to bring them out somewhere up towards the top of the head that's going to be covered by the hat. So I will adjust the nose so that it's kind of centered with the yarn on either side, so that the beard has a better chance of covering it. That's what we look like now. Next comes cutting the beard. So with my fake fur, looking at the back, with the fur direction going this way, I will be cutting 2 small triangles off and then one up here. I don't need to save this one, but I do need to make sure that the fur direction in these cuts are this way. Remember, when you're cutting fake fur, you don't want to cut through the fur, you just want to cut the backing. Otherwise, you're going to lose some of that fullness of the fake fur. So I always like using small pointy scissors for this part to just get through the backing. So I'm going to just snip. So what I'm doing here is cutting just the backing and not the fur. So see how I'm angling my scissors into the fur and just to the backing. So I'm doing tiny little cuts so that I'm not cutting off any more fur than I have to. So we take our eyebrow pieces. Now I'm going to just cut out the tiny triangle at the top. This is just a spacer for the nose.
Now, should I cut it how I cut the bottom triangles as well?
Yes, you should always cut fake fur like that. Then I just pull this, and we're not using that piece. So I will lay my pieces in front of me. And I'm going to get my adhesive. I'm using E6000 here. I will also use Eileen's craft glue, but I have this right now, so that's what we're using. With this, I'm going to just run the glue on the edges of my triangles. And for the beard piece, just making sure that I'm getting all the edges on here. And then I usually just do a little bit like that. All right, to put the beard on, I will grab the fake fur like this with my small triangle up. I will lay my pinky finger on the bottom of my gnome, use my other hand to lift the fur up so that I can kind of tuck this piece under the nose. And then I'm just going to hold it here for a little bit, make sure it's solid. Now I'm going to take my eyebrows. For my eyebrows, we can see which way the fur is going. We want the fur going down, and I'm laying it right here above the nose so it comes down, and that eyebrow will cover that side of the yarn, and then do the same on the other side. Generally, when I do these, I will make a bunch at once, and then they would sit all night to dry just like this. But because we're doing a tutorial, we're just going to put the hat on and finish it. So if the fur falls off, I'm sorry, let it dry first. So next we will take our hat piece here. We are going to gather the far end like so, and I'm going to pull it like this so I can use this to attach it to the gnome. I'm actually going to flip it inside out so that I don't have to move my yarn to the inside once I've knotted it. So I've turned the very top of the hat inside out so that I am able to make my knot here without having to run my ends to the inside. Now for the top of your hat, you could put a bell on the end. You could make pom-poms and all sorts of different things. And I'm going to trim this, save my long piece. Now I have my hat gathered at the top. I have my long piece of scrap yarn, and I have my gnome. I will now take my doubled up yarn and I'm very simply going to go like this. So I'm anchoring my yarn to the inside of the hat.
Does it matter where I stitch my first knot?
You want it towards the top of the inside, right at the top of the hung hem, so that it's not going to be visible. Now what I'm going to do is tuck this end to the inside and leave this out. I will then take my gnome, put my yarn that I'm going to be stitching on with to the back, and I'm going to put his hat on. I like to pull the hats down so they come just over the nose like that. Also, check from the sides to make sure it isn't pulled down too far and that it looks the way you want it to. Now, I have my yarn here in the back. Remember that this yarn would usually match this yarn, but I'm using contrast so you can see. I have my knot right there. I'm now going to bring it through to the outside.
Why are you doing this?
So that I can stitch the hat on and yet hide the stitches. So I brought it to the outside. I'm now going to go back down into the same hole I just came out, but I'm going to go sideways inside my hung hem. So my needle is inside my hung hem. Then I'm going to go, whoops, down through the same hole, down into the body so I can feel stuffing, and then I'm going to come back out through the hat, stitch through. So I now have it stitched here onto the body without being able to see it. So going back down through the hole I came up, over, down into the body, into the stuffing, and coming back out. So this is just the way to stitch the hat on without seeing any of my stitches and having it pucker along that edge there.
So every time I stitch, I'm stitching over and down?
Over and down into the body.
Every time?
Every single time. So now you can't see any of my stitches here, yet my hat is secure on the gnome. Now, when you get by the beard, it does get a little bit tricky, but you can come out right above the nose because you should have an open spot there from where you put your triangles. Down through the hole, into my hung hem, down into the body, and back out. making sure that I'm not catching the beard in those stitches. You can pull it out. It's just good to make sure they're not in there. So I've returned to the back of my gnome. I'm going to come down through my hat, lift up my hat, and pick up a couple stitches.
And now do I want it to go into the shirt?
You're always going through the shirt and down into the body. And here what I'm doing is just picking those up so that I can make a knot. My knot. Now I'm going to bring my end up into the head and bury it. Pulling it out, trimming it, fluffing my hat, and now my gnome is done. So thank you everyone for joining us for this tutorial. I'd like to thank Scarlett, my daughter, who is the one videoing and will be doing the editing. The pattern for the gnome is on the Erlbacher website and also on my website. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to email me. Thank you.